There are some surprising signs that show to me that you're moving above and beyond the middle class, and in today's video, we're gonna discuss what those signs are, how you can identify those signs, and if you're not quite there yet, some actionable steps that you can take. Now, I got this idea after coming across this Yahoo article titled 8 Key Signs You've Made It to the Upper Middle Class, so I'm going to be going over their lists, giving you my personal take, and also giving you my personal finance wisdom based on their points. I also saw a video by another YouTuber, Aaron Talks Money, covering this same subject, and I personally find these things fascinating, so shout out to Aaron, and I will link both the article and her video down below. The first sign on the list is that you have extra money after investments and expenses. And I definitely agree here. I think if you've moved past the middle class, you likely have a stable income, and then you probably have disposable income after all of your recurring expenses so that you can at least take a vacation once or twice a year and also invest into the market or whatever assets you may like. In terms of an exact income that I would classify somebody as moved past the middle class, I would say it's likely that you're probably earning $150,000 per year as a household. At the beginning of the year, I interviewed Alyssa Quart. She's the author of the book titled Squeezed, and that's a book about middle-class life in America. She validated that one of the ways that you can tell somebody is middle class is by their income level, and she said that back in 2020, the median income was around $60,000 per year. But in cities like New York or San Francisco, that figure might be closer to the lower six figures. Now, the Pew Research Center defines the middle-class income as somewhere between 2/3 to 2 times the median household income in the United States. And according to census data, since the median household income in the US is $75,000 a year, the middle class income then would be between $50,000 and $150,000 per year. So to me, if your household income is starting to go above the $150,000 level, then I think you can consider yourself moved past the middle class. The second sign on this list is that you own a mix of assets. Well, if you have a mortgage and a stock portfolio, then technically, yes, you own a mix of assets, but it's unlikely that you own much more than that, such as like a rental property, because I think if you've moved just past the middle class, you don't have assets like that just quite yet. According to IRS income tax data, about 6.7% of individual tax filers, so around 10.3 million people in the United States, reported having rental property income. And according to the Social Security Administration, there are about 28 million people in the upper middle class alone, and that doesn't even take into account the top 20% or the upper class or the wealthy class. So based on the IRS and Social Security data alone, you can see that the numbers don't really add up. Just because you've made it past the middle class doesn't mean that you own rental property quite yet. So instead of owning a mix of assets as an indicator, I would probably say a better sign is that you have a net worth climbing over $200,000. The US Census defines the median net worth of somebody in the upper middle class as $201,800, and that puts you in the top 40% of households in the US. So in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you have a mix of assets or you have all your net worth in one stock portfolio or one property. I think that as long as your net worth is climbing above that 200K threshold, then you can probably consider yourself moved past the middle class. The third surprising sign that you are beyond the middle class is that you live in a more expensive neighborhood. I think for this one, we actually have to question whether or not someone would move to a new neighborhood just because their income and their net worth hit certain milestones. It's more likely if you're increasing your savings, your net worth, and your income, you're likely to stay put exactly where you are because that gives you more time to grow and accumulate your wealth, plus the fact that moving takes quite a while. According to the book The Millionaire Next Door, the people that are the greatest accumulators of wealth, they actually are maximizing their income while they keep their lifestyles exactly the same. Now, I think if you have the momentum of growing your net worth and you're trying to move past the middle class, you probably have some sensibility, instilled within you, and you're probably being reasonable with your expenses because you know that if you increase your expenses by a lot, that's the quickest way to kind of kill your growth. The fourth sign that you've made it past the middle class is that you've experienced positive lifestyle changes. And this isn't really a point about lifestyle inflation. I think it's more about the fact that you now have more disposable income that you can spend on goods and services that you might not have otherwise spent on when you were, quote, middle class. For example, you might be able to hire a house cleaner 2 times per month. Maybe you have a dedicated food budget, and you don't have to really get a payment plan when it comes to a big purchase like an iPad or a MacBook Pro. In general, you're not desperate for that next paycheck, and you probably have a bunch of excess savings that you're able to allocate in however you want, and hopefully you're investing that. You probably also don't sweat the small changes in price whenever you go out to eat or buy groceries or buy whatever miscellaneous items that you might need. So for example, if you're used to your gallon of milk costing you say $4, if the fact it's now $5, it probably doesn't bother you that much, and it probably doesn't mean the difference between you making ends meet or not. It's at this point that if you're making more of an income and your net worth is increasing, many other people in the same boat as you will probably fall victim to lifestyle inflation. However, you know a lot better than they do, and you're gonna just continue your habits and be wise and grow your wealth wealth that way. Another way to grow your wealth is to sign up for my free newsletter called Hump Days. It comes out twice per week on Wednesdays and Sundays. It's completely free, and I will link it down below. It's for business and economic news, and I hope to see you guys in there. The fifth sign that you've made it past the middle class is that you are now able to afford higher education expenses. Now, the key word here, in my opinion, is the word afford. Tuition has increased disproportionately to wages. So in 1971, the average tuition was $1,250 per year, but adjusted for inflation today, that's $10,000 per year. However, we know that the cost of average tuition in the year 2023 and 2024 for the same public four-year institution is actually 2.5 times higher, or $25,000 per year. So this graph shows you it all. If public school tuition were to keep steady with inflation, a single year of tuition would be less than $10,000 per year in today's dollars, but we just aren't seeing that today. According to the Yahoo article, quote, "Those in the upper middle class can afford to attend college or send their children to college without having to take on this debt." And yes, I would argue while they can, quote, afford it, it doesn't mean that it's not hard. Education costs, even for those in the upper middle class, can bring about some stress. So even if your income is, say, $200,000 per year and your net worth is crossing that $201,800 level, it doesn't mean that it's not stressful. I personally would like to clarify this point as as long as education costs don't give you a ton of stress, then you've probably made it past the middle class. I think not having any stress about college education costs is probably reserved for those in the top 20%. So if the notion of dropping like $200K on education costs doesn't stress you out at all, then you've probably made it to the wealthy class, and that would make for a very different video. The sixth sign that you've made it past the middle class is that you have minimal financial stress. Now, this is something I agree with. I think the key word here is minimal. I think that you still might have stress when it comes to the bigger costs, but for a lot of the normal everyday costs like your rent, your food, or your debt payments, you're likely covered. A good sign that you're past the middle class is that you have three characteristics, and these three characteristics are the following. Number one is that you have no debt besides a mortgage. So the average American has personal debt, excluding mortgages, of around $21,800. According to a recent study, a lot of that comes from a credit card. So I think if we're able to be below that number of $21,800, then we're going to be doing much better than the average American. If you do have debt, such as student loans or longer term types of debt, hopefully it's manageable. Characteristic number two, you have an emergency fund of at least $2,000, because according to a recent article, 57% of Americans are unable to afford a $1,000 emergency expense. So I think having double that in an emergency fund is the bare minimum you should be having, especially if you want to consider yourself past the middle class. And I would say even closer to 3 to 6 months of emergency expenses saved up in an emergency fund is probably what you should have. And number three, I think that you should be able to save at least 10 to 15% of your gross income. Now, in some cases, even 20% is needed, because if you want to retire early, then that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a large savings rate. The next sign you're past the middle class is if you are considering to retire early. I tend to think of early retirement as an opportunity for those that are in the top 20% of incomes, but the truth is that there's a large online community of people that are living very frugally, and even with a modest income, they're able to retire early. Their main plan is to save at least 30, 50, or even 70% of their income by eating rice and beans and living as cheaply as possible in order to hit their financial independence retire early number as quickly as possible. There's a popular calculator online called the Net Worthify calculator that you can play with, and I basically plugged in somebody with a 40% savings rate at the $150,000 income range, and they could retire in 18 years starting with a zero portfolio balance. While that's not super early by any means, in 18 years, let's say if you're the age of 30 right now, that means you could still retire by the age of 48. Essentially, that still gets you to retirement about 17 years earlier than the average American does. All right, the next surprising sign that you are way above and beyond the middle class is that if you have multiple income streams. Now, the article states that the people in the lower to middle income class ranges only have one income source, and that those that are typically a little bit wealthier have 2 or 3 or even 4 income sources. Now, this is something I don't necessarily agree with. I think you could easily get above the $150,000 household income level with just one source of income, your earned income. And while the article does state that you might have multiple businesses and rental properties going on at a time, I think if you've made it just past middle class, you likely don't have these, as I referenced a little bit earlier in this video. I think the easiest income streams to add after your main income stream of earned income is dividend income from investments, perhaps interest income from a high yield savings account, or capital gains income from buying and selling different types of stocks or assets. That's just my personal opinion. I would love to hear from you guys in the comments if you think that someone that's just broken out of the middle class will have more than one income stream or not. I think when it comes to breaking into the next class, it's really about staying disciplined, building your net worth slowly but debt steadily and also living within your means. While your net worth could fluctuate throughout the year, I think as long as it's trending in the right direction, then you're on a pretty good path. Let me know down below if you agree or disagree with any of the points in today's video. Make sure to sign up for Hump Days. It's completely free and I will link that down below. If you're interested in my best tips to get wealthy and my best personal finance tips, you want to check out this video right here. It's about the 21 money lessons that I wish I knew earlier. I will hopefully see you guys in that video or a future one on this channel. Thank you for being here. Peace.